So I feel like your shares kind of opened up some nice teaching that I hadn't anticipated today, and I never do. I mean, that's part of why I love these dialogues, is because I can't necessarily think ahead of time as to what out there you need to hear. So you got to tell me sometimes. The thing that was kind of on my mind today, which I'll just share as an aspect of tenderness, is thinking. Like tenderness toward thinking, toward our conceptual minds. It's often the case that, when you learn meditation, you're kind of taught to try to get away from your thoughts. And there's a place for that. And we use a focus like the breath or the body, sensations of the body, the scan of the body, as a way to draw you out of conceptualization in a more immediate contact with things as they are, unmediated by your concepts, unmediated by your thoughts. Is such an important part of meditation. And it's kind of where people need to begin. So if you're beginning with this, stay with it. What I'm going to talk about is a little harder to do. But at some point you have to do it, because thinking and conceptualizing is just such a huge part of being this human being that we are, But the key to it, I really realize, is a certain kind of tenderness towards your thinking. It's easy, sometimes if you've been taught to meditate, to judge your thinking, to think that there's something bad in you thinking, like you shouldn't be thinking. Thoughts come up. And so I try to be careful with people to say, just notice that you're thinking. Thoughts happen. I always thought that would be a good bumper sticker, Thoughts happen. They do. They just arise. And we're not responsible for them. We're responsible for what follows next. We're not so much responsible for the thought that arises, but what our response is, what happens next. And so when I was thinking about tenderness toward thoughts, part of the skill of dealing with thinking is to feel into the vulnerability that is in our thinking. And that's not always obvious. We do so much work to anticipate things, like what needs to happen. And then we develop habits around that allow us to kind of only see in these boxes of the habits of what needs to get done to get out the door, to get to work. Our work so often involves kind of anticipating things and what might go wrong, or what has to follow what in order for something to come about that needs to happen. If you're teaching, it's so that students can learn. If you operate a business, it's so that people will hear about your product. All these sort of contingencies make demands of our mind. But right in there's this vulnerability. We do this because we're trying to create a margin of control in a world that's really complex and often not very controllable. We try to create for ourselves order. We try to create for ourselves structure and predictability. So when I look at my planning mind, and we're going to be leaving tomorrow to go to visit our daughter in Colorado. So there's that whole airport thing, with our packing thing. And I just kind of watched my mind when I was meditating this morning. What was it really doing? Figuring out what ducks needed to get in a row for us to, clean this place and get out of this place, and so forth. The drill. You know what it's like. And first of all, there was great gratitude. I'm grateful that we as animals have this ability to order our world in this way. But I also see the vulnerability in it because all of these sort of anticipated things are purely mind-made. They do not exist in reality until they happen. Reality always is now. It's never in the future. The future is always imagined. And so we're constantly like imagining a future and then getting upset because things come up that interrupt our future, our imagined future. And then there's a moment of panic. And in that moment of panic, you realize this poor mind is trying to avoid that situation where you feel afraid because things get off rail, or where you feel ashamed because you forgot to think about some contingency, or you left something behind, you forgot something, you didn't prepare for some particular outcome. And there's a whole social kind of thing with that people expect you to be prepared, they expect you to be competent. And I was just feeling a certain tenderness toward that today. How much our minds are struggling because on some level there's some fear there of not being prepared. And you watch people who have memory problems and how they keep showing up in situations confused and not knowing what to do. You're particularly grateful then for your ability to foresee the future or to remember the past. But there's just a vulnerability there. And sometimes I really have to work to take my mind off the hook, to kind of reach in. I sometimes talk about like putting a mental hand on the back of that mind, the planning mind, and just kind of comforting myself in a certain way. And you can only do that when you feel the emotional currents that are behind your thinking. You can't do that when you're like completely identified with it, okay, in the figuring out mode, getting it done, so forth. This happens more when you step back. You're actually able to feel something of that. And I was noticing the pride that I have and how good I am at kind of these sorts of administrative functions. And it's funny because that pride also has vulnerability in it. Because the fact I'm proud about it means I'm also vulnerable to shame in the moments when I can't maintain that standard for myself, There's also a vulnerability to it because as I age, that may diminish. My ability to function administratively may diminish. It may already have diminished. As I look at myself, it may already have diminished. So, so that was just a word for on behalf of the thinking mind. The conceptualizing, trying to understand mind too, about how it's trying to help us out, and that yet there's a vulnerability in that. The reason we try so hard to understand is we need to. Often, the more we understand, the more we feel like we have control over our world. The more we feel like we can help out in situations where someone is sick or there's some engineering problem to take care of, something breaks, all this sort of things that happen, we call in our mind for, we call in our thinking mind for. And it feels the weight of that responsibility. So I'll end there. That's, I think, enough for you to get the idea of something just to take into your week with you. Is perhaps to take a glance now and again at the vulnerability of your own thinking mind and its ability to predict and structure your world. The vulnerability there, and just have some tenderness toward it, some softness, especially when it messes up. Okay? All right. So be well. Have a good week.